Roughly 2,000 Palestinians are said to be released in exchange for the 48 Israeli captives. Now, among them, 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza. The United Nations considers them forcibly disappeared. Then, another 250 Palestinians who have been serving life and long sentences, mostly for attacks or alleged involvement in violence against Israelis. 135 of them will be deported to the to the Gaza Strip, or indeed exiled abroad as well. 100 are expected to be sent to the occupied West Bank. Now, 15 are set to be released in East Jerusalem. Now, ahead of the exchange of prisoners, we have them being transported to Ofer prison, as we just saw, near Ramallah, and Ketziot prison in the Negev desert. All living captives and bodies of dead Israeli captives held in Gaza are being released in exchange for these Palestinian prisoners. Just to reiterate on this, 20 Israeli men are expected to be handed over to the Red Cross. They've spent 2 years in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023, when Hamas and its allied fighters took captive 251 Israelis and foreign nationals during their attack. Now, every week, their families have gathered in Tel Aviv, protesting against Israel's war, calling for a ceasefire and the release of their relatives. Many accuse Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of blocking a deal for a ceasefire and return of those captives for his own political gain. Well, Noura there is following developments in Israel from Amman. She's there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside of Israel or indeed from the occupied West Bank. We have our diplomatic editor, James Bays, standing by in New York. But let's get to the scene of the action. In Khan Yunis in central Gaza, we have Hind Khudri. Hind, what's going on there at the moment? It seems almost palpable that this release is going to be imminent.
Well, everyone's preparing, everyone's anticipating. I'm currently standing in front of the medical checkpoint where the Palestinian prisoners are going to be transferred first as they arrive to the Gaza Strip. Now, what we know so far is the Red Cross is going to be doing all the logistics. They're going to be transferring the Palestinian prisoners. They're going to be first transferred to this medical checkpoint here in Khan Yunis, in Al-Nasr Hospital. This has been all established and set up for this day exactly. So, doctors, nurses are saying that they are waiting for the Palestinian prisoners. They will first do a medical checkup on them, and then they're going to be welcomed by thousands of Palestinians who are waiting for them in front of the medical checkup point. Now, every time Palestinian prisoners are freed, they are come exhausted, drained, thirsty, hungry, and very, very mentally, their health is very, very ill, and they're also mentally exhausted from everything they went through during their detention. Now, what we know is there are at least 1,700 Palestinians that are going to be freed today, and these were the Palestinians that were either arrested or missing since the 7th of October 2023. Families are starting to arrive. Everyone's anticipating, and everyone is happy that today is going to be a day where Palestinians are going to reunite with their families, a day that Palestinian families have been waiting for so long. But they're expecting a delay, and they are expecting that they're going to be released in late hours, and this is because this happens every single time where families wait for so long for this moment.
Hind, hold that thought. I'm going to get it to Amman and Noor Odeh there. And Noor, just getting reports from the Reuters news agency that all 1,966 Palestinian detainees slated for expected release have boarded buses at Israeli prisons. This is according to the Reuters news agency. We also have 7 hostages, or shall I say 7 captives, which have been apparently put into the custody of the International Red Cross. What more do we have? Because there's major anticipation in all this, with crowds gathering in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv at the moment.
Yeah, there are quite a few updates. Let's start with the Israeli captives. They are now in the custody of the Israeli army. And that's why you see the Palestinian prisoners, detainees, and the disappeared now in buses. We've also heard from the International Committee of the Red Cross saying that we have started a multi-phase operation to facilitate the release and transfer of hostages and detainees as part of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. The Red Cross has also entered Aufar military prison to transport a sick Palestinian prisoner out, separate from the buses. Apparently, he will need medical evacuation. We also are hearing from the families of Palestinian prisoners and detainees. 12 of them were expecting their loved ones to be released to their homes in the occupied West Bank, only to learn in the past hour that their sons will be exiled. They will not be going to the occupied West Bank. Those who already knew of the exile of their sons tried to leave the occupied West Bank yesterday, and they were denied by the Israeli authorities. So there is a lot of emotions right now, and emotions are going really high. In addition to all that uncertainty and those last-minute changes, you have the situation in Gaza. Israel hasn't clarified when the 1,700 Palestinians will be released to Gaza, but the list has finally been released, and they are not a list of all the Palestinians disappeared from Gaza. So while 1,700 families will be celebrating, others still have questions about the whereabouts and fate of their loved ones.
Yeah, let's get it back to Khan Yunis and the Nasser hospital here, because that's where I believe these Palestinian prisoners will arrive. What happens then? Do they get processed? What is the deal?
Now, we have an update. The Red Cross teams, a medical team and a protection team, just arrived to a Nasser hospital, and they're now inside this department waiting for the Palestinian prisoners. Now, we know that the Red Cross is going to be transferring the Palestinian prisoners to here, to Khan Yunis. All of them are going to be transferred to this medical point. They're going to receive medical checkups. Everything is going to be checked, and then they are going to attend a ceremony where thousands of Palestinian families are waiting for their beloved ones. Now, what we need to know is most of the families do not know who's coming, who's being released, who's going to stay in Israeli prisons, what's going to happen. So most of the Palestinian prisoners' whereabouts are unknown for their families. We're talking about months where they have been not able to reach their family members. They do not know where they are, and some of them do not even know where they were detained or arrested by the Israeli forces. Now, what's going to happen next? Definitely, Palestinians are going to reunite with their families, and they're going to live with them for the first time. But also, let me highlight the fact that these Palestinians were arrested after October 7. The amount of destruction that is in the streets, the amount of destruction everywhere across the Gaza Strip is unbearable. And it's going to be very hard for these Palestinian prisoners to adjust the fact of how the Israeli forces have completely destroyed Gaza. It's going to be very hard for them to process of how Gaza has turned to a wasteland, and there's going to be a lot of emotional moments. Most of those Palestinian prisoners have their family members also killed. Some won't even find any family members left. And these are the stories behind what's going to happen today. Yes, it's a happy day. It's a day of freedom. But every single Palestinian prisoners have a heartbreaking stories, and we're going to be following for sure some of these Palestinian prisoners and telling you their stories.
Okay, let's get from Khan Yunis back to Amman and Noura. The momentum in all this is building up very, very quickly, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, despite all the tension and the hiccups, if you will, despite the lack of confidence in the intentions, especially of Benjamin Netanyahu among Israelis and Palestinians, there is a momentum building. There is a framing of events, if you will, coming from Washington that almost wants to will this to be something more than a ceasefire, more than phase one of a ceasefire. Donald Trump will be arriving in Israel for a very short visit. He will be addressing the Knesset, meeting with the families of captives before that, talking about his deal, his plan, his achievement, and then going to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, where he will be meeting with world leaders to talk about peace in the Middle East. Now, there are more questions than answers about this peace in the Middle East that Donald Trump is talking about, and people will be listening closely because really, the only thing that was clear is phase one, the release of Israeli captives in exchange for Palestinian detainees and the disappeared. Everything after that still needs a lot of talking and negotiations, and even the mediators have a lot of concerns about the idea of keeping Palestinians out of Palestinian governance.
All right, Noor there in Amman for us, and of course we've been joined also by Hind Khudari as well. But James Mays is live for us in New York, and this prisoner swap, James, was really meant to be done by the time that President Trump landed in Israel. We could just about make it. What time is he meant to arrive?
Meant to arrive in just under 45 minutes' time. I am sure they are watching this on Air Force One because, of course, that is a very sophisticated aircraft with full communications systems. So I'm sure the team around the president are monitoring developments closely. This has been very carefully choreographed, that everything, but it is, of course, a very delicate and fragile process, that everything should take place as the president arrives, or by the time he arrives at Tel Aviv. That's 45 minutes from now. The president on a very short visit both to Israel and then to Egypt. The total time of him in the region is under 8 hours. He will be in Israel for about 4 hours of that, then flies on to Sharm el-Sheikh for this peace summit as it's being billed. But the actual time on the ground in Egypt is only 3 hours. And by the time you've gone to the airport and got on Air Force One and got off Air Force One, I predict you'll probably only be with the other leaders who are there for about 2 hours. And of course, some of that is going to be the signing ceremony. The 20-point Trump plan has, of course, already been signed. We've seen the signatures on it, but the White House insisting there should now be a formal signing involving the president himself, because I think they very much want the pictures to show his involvement in this to be seen all around the world.
It'd be quite a guest list in Sharm el-Sheikh, isn't there, James?
Quite a guest list. We don't actually haven't had the full list given to us, so some question marks of exactly who all the people will be there. But we know that Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, is likely to be there, and we hear that Israel is likely not to be represented, which seems interesting. But Israel not particularly keen, I think, on pushing ahead very quickly on the later parts of this 20-point plan. We know exactly what's happening, or what should happen, over the coming hours while President Trump is in the region. But after that, yes, there are broad ideas that Gaza should be run by this board of peace, with President Trump chairing that board, involvement from the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and other key figures from the region, technocratic governance of Gaza with Palestinians who are not in any way aligned with Hamas, and supposedly an international stabilization force to take take security control on the ground. Questions there, which countries will be involved? We know some countries in the region want to be involved. We know Indonesia, France, Italy have suggested they'll have some sort of involvement in this. We also know that there is a group of US troops, about 200, who have arrived in Israel to start coordination on this and on bringing all the aid in. They are not, though, in Gaza. They're on the Israeli side of the border coordinating with this, and the White House very keen to stress there will not be any US troops on the ground in Gaza at any point.
James, thank you. James Baza for us in New York. Now, Stephen Zunes is a professor of politics and chairperson of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco, and he joins us from Boston. Professor, thank you for joining us. What are you making of today, and what are you making about the footsteps towards, or a roadmap towards peace, should there be one?
I think it's fairly significant that the gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh is bringing in so many leaders from so many countries, including the UN Secretary General, and of course Trump's present as well. I mean, I think it may be a sign that, unlike the January agreement, which Netanyahu broke off 2 months later with apparent support from Washington, it'll be harder for him to do so this time. And that there's seriousness about pressing ahead to make sure the ceasefire is indeed permanent this time.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? Ultimately, it's the next withdrawal and the subsequent withdrawal, which is based on so many preconditions. There are many ways of Benjamin Netanyahu, should he still be in power, to get out of this.
Yes, and he's been deliberately vague, it appears, regarding the extent and the timetable of the withdrawal. That's obviously very important. That's tied, of course, to whether Hamas will agree to totally disarm. And unless there is clear that the ceasefire is permanent, that Israel is out of there, we're not going to see the investments from the Gulf or others who are trying to clear the rubble and try to rebuild the Gaza Strip from the enormous destruction that we've seen. So there's a lot at stake here.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is, how has Benjamin Netanyahu's political calculus changed with perhaps less than a year, much less than a year, before he has to call an election?
I think what the calculus has changed is that the President of the United States has finally pressured him to go as far as he has. This is something that Trump had not done in the past. It's something that Biden had not done, even when there are very similar proposals on the table in both May and September of last year. And I think what made Trump finally act, frankly, was that the governments of Qatar and of Egypt and Turkey and then perhaps some others with whom Trump wants to have good strategic relationships and lucrative financial relationships, good personal relationships, pressed him and saying, hey, we have pressured Hamas to compromise in all these ways. It's your turn to press Israel to compromise as well.
Well, the other aspect is he's got to keep his coalition together, and the likes of Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are not exactly people who like this deal. In fact, they said there's no way they'd ever actually countenance it.
My guess is what's been happening is there are a couple of the centrist parties that have been reluctant to save Netanyahu until now, recognize that this is the only way that there could be a ceasefire, which increasing numbers of Israelis have really been wanting. They saw little strategic value with continuing the war, a lot of risk in terms of the hostages and Israeli soldiers, not to mention the fact that Europe was finally talking about possibly putting on some economic sanctions in addition to the military sanctions that a number of them have had, not to mention the fact that you have global civil society mobilizing in an unprecedented degree and Israel being more isolated than it's ever been before. So I think there's some forces within Israeli society, pragmatic forces that said, hey, maybe we can add a few, we can keep promise to Netanyahu that will let him keep his stay as prime minister for a little while longer in case the far right will not support him.
Well, I was going to bring up the topic of international pressure, but, you know, it's a grassroots movement rather than one which is quite often really reflected at the upper echelons of governance, but it's beginning to.
Exactly, and we've seen this before, whether it be apartheid in South Africa, or whether it be U.S. wars in Central America, Vietnam, of course, and in general, when you have seen global civil society mobilize like this, it takes a while. It's frustratingly long when their people are dying in vast numbers, but eventually it trickles up, and politicians have to listen.
Let's look at also Israeli society itself. I was talking to one of our guests recently, and he suggested that the society there is really living in its own kind of post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome there because of what happened on the 7th of October and the way that the media and other aspects of the society, their civil society, have been covering the conflict in Gaza.
I mean, certainly the events of 2 years ago were indeed traumatic. And unfortunately, and one of the bad things about terrorism is that it tends to harden the attitude of the people that whose policies you're trying to change. And of course, the Israeli media and the government and some foreign governments like the United States provoke that by false claims of beheading babies and other what appear to be deliberate misinterpretations of what went on. But I think also, the fact is that there are some pragmatic voices that have been trying to speak out, including people in the security establishment that recognize that Israel's overreaction, even putting aside the moral and legal questions, was in the long term really hurting Israel. And so, I mean, I think it's difficult to imagine that there's going to be a new wave of peace and human rights activism that'll fundamentally change the shape of Israeli societies. But I think there's a growing sense that indeed they've gone too far, and that they're going to have to recognize that they can't just do everything any time they want to, and that perhaps, as we've been seeing in these past couple weeks with Trump finally cracking down a little bit, they can't necessarily rely on a blank check from the United States forever.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen Zunis there, Professor of Politics and Chairperson of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco.
Thank you.
Well, let's get straight back to Oman and Noor Odeh there, following developments. What are the latest developments, Noor?
Well, the latest, Rashad, is that 7 Israeli captives are in the custody of the Israeli army. It is reported that they are walking and in reasonable conditions, as several reports in Israeli media framed it. The families of the Israeli captives were told since yesterday to be at the Ra'im military base. This is southwest of Gaza City in what is called the Gaza envelope. That's where the Israeli captives will first land, and then they will be transferred to civilian facilities. The families are waiting to meet, at least some of them, the American president later on today. This is the first of at least one more release of Israeli captives, possibly at 10 a.m. local time. The Red Cross has confirmed that it has begun this process on the Israeli side, but also on the Palestinian side. In the Ofar military camp near Ramallah, the Red Cross has entered to begin the evacuation, the medical evacuation of one Palestinian prisoner who cannot be in the bus waiting with the other prisoners. But there have been switches and changes. 12 Palestinian families in the occupied West Bank that were told they will be united with their loved ones have been devastated by news that their sons will be exiled. They will not be united with them. This change happening in the 11th hour. And it is something that many families have feared because, again, this has happened before in previous exchanges of prisoners. And until the last minute, until people see their loved ones in their arms, they just cannot trust that this will happen. That is true for Palestinians, and the anxiety is also true for the families of Israeli captives who don't trust the intentions of their prime minister, as they've repeatedly told us in the past days.
Well, absolutely. Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the region, when mentioning Benjamin Netanyahu's name in Hostages Square, was booed largely here as well. He's not done his popularity any favours.
That is right, especially within the right-wing circles. Let's just remember that Benjamin Netanyahu heads the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. This coalition wanted more, not less war. Israel is now waging war on 7 fronts, not just a genocide in Gaza. The Israeli ministers were talking annexation of Gaza. They were talking about building settlements in the enclave, about deporting the population. So the fact that Donald Trump announced a ceasefire, announced the acceptance of Hamas's response, is talking about ending the war, is extremely problematic for the coalition. They cannot confront Donald Trump outright, but many in the Israeli political scene warn Netanyahu will look for an excuse, and that's what everybody should be looking out for. That's where the fear is, that, war for now is over, the bombing has stopped, but it's not all said and done yet.
Noor, thank you very much. Noor, there in Amman. It's going to tell you about what's going on in Khan Yunis now as well, because we have Hind Khudri there as well. And what have we been seeing, Hind? Have you seen any arrivals of any Palestinians? Because I think you're at the Nasser hospital where they are going to be processed.
Well, we're only seeing the Red Cross staff that arrived to the hospital, getting ready to receive the Palestinian prisoners. We saw medical teams, we also saw protection teams, and we also saw the logistics teams where the International Committee of the Red Cross are going to be doing all the transferring and all the logistics for the Palestinian prisoners. Everyone's still waiting. Let me show you behind me. This is the ceremony where those thousands of Palestinians are waiting for their beloved ones. We're expecting at least 1,700 Palestinians that were arrested and detained and were missing after October 7, 2023. Now, what's going to happen? The Palestinian prisoners are going to be transferred to the hospital in the medical point. They're going to receive the medical checkup, and then they're going to be greeted here by their families and their beloved ones. Now, it's still very early in the morning, but they don't mind waiting. They're saying that they have been waiting for so long, for months, for years, and they don't mind waiting for a couple of hours today. Now, every single time there's a Palestinian prisoner release, it's very late, there's a lot of obstacles, there's a lot of delays, and Palestinians here know that it's going to take a lot of time. But let me also tell you that everyone's happy, everyone's smiling. They're waiting for this day for so long. Today is going to day where thousands of Palestinian prisoners are going to reunite with their families. Yes, some of the Palestinian prisoners lost their family members during the war, where they will go back home and they won't find their family members. But yes, there are a lot of others still waiting to know what is going to happen with the other Palestinian prisoners, that they were unable to reach them. They do not know what's happening. And also, let me also let you know that the list is not clear. We do not know who's coming out, who's not. So some of the families here are just waiting to see the faces until they recognize the face of one of their beloved ones or their family members. Everyone's anticipating. We know that 7 Israeli captives have been handed to the Red Cross, and this makes Palestinian feels like it's getting closer. The Palestinian prisoners are going to be released soon, but during this time, everyone's waiting and everyone's smiling and hoping that this day is going to go smoothly.
Hind Khudri there in Khan Yunis. It is just coming up to 2 minutes past 6 GMT in the morning. It is 9:02 a.m. in Tel Aviv, Ramallah and Gaza City. Let's update you with what's been happening. Palestinian groups have released the first round of living Israeli captives held in Gaza, and that as it was agreed under the ceasefire deal with Israel. 7 captives have been handed over to the Red Cross, who will facilitate their transfer to Israeli forces. They are expected to undergo an initial medical examination before arriving at the Re'em military base in southern Israel. That's where they will reunite with their families for the first time in more than 2 years. The first handover was celebrated by emotional crowds, including families of the Israeli captives in what is known as Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. These are live images coming from exactly there. It's exactly where Israelis have been protesting every week since the war began. Many of them have accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of sabotaging and delaying previous attempts to reach a deal to secure their release. The captives, they're going to be exchanged for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners who are expected to be freed in the coming hours. We have reports that they are all on buses at the moment. They will be released from off a prison in the occupied West Bank, and among them there are 1,700 Palestinians that were taken from Gaza. The United Nations considers them forcibly disappeared. Well, Noor O'Day has been following developments in Israel from Jordan's capital. She's in Amman because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting in Israel as well as the occupied West Bank. The sense of anticipation in Tel Aviv is palpable. The crowds already have been gathering there. They've been there all night. What do we know?
It is really palpable, and it's been a long 2 years for the families of the Israeli captives who remain. 20 living Israeli captives, 28 dead Israeli captives who will be handed over, at least most of them will be handed over today. 7 are already in the custody of the Israeli army. They've been in touch with their families. They're reported to be in reasonable condition, walking, not requiring medical assistance, more than the checkup and so on. So this is big news for the Israeli families who held an overnight vigil, wanting to maintain the pressure on their government, which they do not trust. They wanted to see this materialize, to believe it was really happening, thanking the American president for pushing this through, knowing full well that the coalition was very hesitant, the ruling coalition in Israel. What does it mean that 7 Israeli captives have been released? It means that the process of releasing Palestinians has already also commenced. Almost 2,000 Palestinians, Rashad, will be released. Nearly 100 of them should be released to the occupied West Bank. The Red Cross reporting that they will be facilitating the medical evacuation of 1 Palestinian prisoner from the Ofar military camp near Ramallah. Others will be transported by bus. 12 of the Palestinians who were supposed to be released to their homes and families in the occupied West Bank will now be exiled. This is devastating news for their families coming in the 11th hour, but it's something that families have always feared, the last-minute changes, which almost always happen. So this is the first devastating news, if you will, coming to the families of Palestinian detainees. Those who knew their loved ones would be exiled tried to leave the occupied West Bank yesterday. They were not allowed by Israel. So the reunion will not happen in person when they reach Egypt, which is the first stop they're expected to make.
Noor, we've also had the Israelis warning off people in the West Bank from celebrating when their relatives return.
Yes, contrast the scenes of jubilation that you're seeing in Tel Aviv with very clear instructions, very clear threats by Israeli security authorities to the families of Palestinian prisoners. They are not allowed to celebrate. They're not allowed to raise Palestinian flags or the banners of Palestinian factions. They're not allowed to receive well-wishers in occupied East Jerusalem. They're not even allowed to receive second-degree family members to celebrate the freedom of the released prisoners. So no expressions of happiness allowed for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This has been the measures. These have been the measures adopted by Israel throughout the past 2 years. Of course, the way Israel deals with the West Bank has also changed. The Israeli forces go into Palestinian cities to remove Palestinian flags, to remove graffiti on the walls inside Palestinian cities. That's the kind of control that Israel is now exercising in Palestinian lives, on Palestinian lives and the details of that life. And it is really a change in the way Palestinians experience the occupation. It was already choking life out of the occupied West Bank. Now it is managing and changing the way they can express their happiness at events like this.
Thank you so much for that, Noor Odeh there in Amman. Let's get you now to New York. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, is live for us from there. I think Air Force One is due to land within the half hour or thereabouts, and it looks as though we might well get this prisoner swap done by then, or partially done by then at least.
Well, it's even shorter than half an hour, according to the schedule we have. He should be landing in about 12 minutes' time. In fact, we have some pictures from Tel Aviv, from Ben Gurion Airport, where already they've got the red carpet out, and we've also seen pictures of the US and Israeli flags ready for when Air Force One has touched down and when President Trump comes down the steps for what will be a very short visit, not just to Israel, but also to Egypt. The whole trip to the region is under 8 hours long, very carefully choreographed, and choreographed not just the trip and where President Trump's going to go, but also to match the president's flight path. As you say, they've tried to get this exchange of prisoners carried out, which of course is a very delicate matter. So whether it will all be completed by the time he lands, I think probably unlikely now, given the landing time is just minutes away. But they're hoping, I think, it will all be completed by the time the president then goes on to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and gives a speech where we know what he's going to say, because he's already been speaking to reporters on Air Force One and saying that his deal, the 20-point plan, is a great deal for everyone involved, and that includes the people of Gaza and the people of Israel, and he believes it's a wider piece for the region. But when he goes on to Sharm el-Sheikh, he'll be meeting some international leaders. Again, very short trip, a trip that's only going to be about 3 hours on the ground in Egypt. So in terms of actually meeting other leaders, a very short period of time for that, because there's going to be a formal signing ceremony. And I think there are questions among some of those other countries about what happens after this initial phase. It's a 20-point plan, but as you get further down the 20 points, some of the later points are a little bit more vague, and a lot of the detail needs to be filled in. And we know from the Qatari Prime Minister, who gave an interview to the New York Times, that when they were doing the negotiations, they actually didn't try and fill in that detail at this stage because they thought it could collapse the negotiations. And they wanted this first phase, the phase of the handover of the Israeli captives and the release of the Palestinian prisoners, to be completed, and then hope to be able to nail down the other details about the future of governance for Gaza. We know some of the plans, and then, of course, what happens beyond that. They talk about a pathway to statehood for the Palestinians. As I say, at that point, the plan gets very vague indeed.
Well, absolutely. So, do we expect anything to emerge then about the second phase of this plan?
Well, some of the second phase, I think we do need detail pretty soon. We need to know how Gaza is going to be governed. There's going to be, we know, a board of peace, it's going to be called, chaired by President Trump, and other key figures to be sitting on that board. Perhaps we'll get an announcement of exactly who those figures are. We know the name has already been mentioned by the US of the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, a controversial choice, of course, because he was there alongside George Bush in the invasion invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then served as the special envoy for the so-called quartet, which was supposed to advance Middle East peace, and not much happened during his tenure in that job. And the other key thing that perhaps we'll learn something from this summit in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh is which countries will join this international stabilization force. Some countries have come forward and say they'll definitely be involved. We think regional countries will be involved. We know Indonesia is promising a large contingent. We've heard from the French and the Italians that they could contribute something to that force, but more details on which countries could be involved and when that force could be made in a position to actually be operational, getting troops into Gaza. It's going to be a difficult operation to get those people on the ground in a place that is so damaged and devastated, and in a way that doesn't upset those on the ground. Remember, there are still Hamas fighters. We assume they still have their arms. How are they going to be disarmed, as this deal says they should be?
James, thank you. James Bays, our diplomatic editor in New York. Let's get to the Nasser hospital in southern Gaza. Khan Yunis, Hind Khudari is there. We're seeing some pictures coming through of buses. Have any buses arrived just yet? Because, again, we are really bursting with anticipation.
Not yet, but we received some medical teams from the ICRC, and there are especially medical teams and protection teams where they're going to be taking care, along with other doctors from Al-Nasser hospital, with the Palestinian prisoners as soon as they get transferred to here to Al-Nasser hospital. Now, it's very obvious that everyone's prepared, everyone's anticipating, and everyone is actually waiting for the moment the Palestinian prisoners make it to here, to the Gaza Strip, and especially to Khan Yunis, to Al-Nasser hospital. We see the families behind me waiting and anticipating, and they know that it's going to be a long day, there's going to be a lot of delays, but they do not mind waiting. They have been waiting for so long to hear anything about their family members and their beloved ones. Now, first thing, when they arrive, they're going to receive a medical checkup, and after the medical checkup, they will be greeted to the audience and for their family members and their beloved ones here behind me in Al-Nasser Hospital's courtyard. Everyone's waiting, everyone's anticipating. But the situation is also a little bit heartbreaking, where some Palestinian prisoners won't find their family members as they were killed during this war. They will not find their houses as they have been completely destroyed and bulldozed by the Israeli forces, where Gaza has turned into a wasteland where most of Gaza's residents are homeless and they do not have any place to go back to. Now, what we are also expecting is the Palestinian prisoners to be very tired as they arrive. They're going to be very hungry, thirsty, and they're also going to be drained from the detention centers. And we have been already seeing this every time Palestinian prisoners are freed. They're very tired from everything they went through in the Israeli prisons. Now, according to the families, they're saying that they're willing to stay here until midnight, until they see their beloved ones and reunite with them and also hug them. It's a long day, but it's a day where Palestinians are going to be free, and it's a day where Palestinians are going to reunite with their families after a so long time.
Hind, thank you so much. Hind Khudari there. We'll be back with her, no doubt, as we wait for the arrival of those Palestinian prisoners in Khan Yunis. Well, joining us in the studio is Mohammed Al-Masri. He's a political analyst and a professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you for joining us, Professor. What are you making of today's... Well, I suppose today is the first day, but we have to look to tomorrow.
Absolutely. You know, this exchange that we're seeing, it's very significant, obviously. One of the things that I've been doing this morning is following some of the media coverage, and I would be remiss as a media researcher and scholar if I didn't point out that in mainstream Western media, and I've looked at a bunch of the different, the news outlets, there's almost an exclusive focus on the release of the Israeli hostages from Gaza and their families, humanizing their stories. There's almost no emphasis on the Palestinians who are being released. And
Is that because, unlike Al Jazeera, they do not have people on the ground in Gaza?
Well, I think that might be part of it. To be frank, though, it's a small part of it. If you go back decades, there are dozens and dozens of studies that have been done on Israel-Palestine, media coverage of Israel-Palestine. And there's just a general othering of Palestinians that we find. There's a kind of dehumanization. There's just not a lot of emphasis on Palestinian humanity. And that's just a much broader problem. So I thought that was something interesting. But there will undoubtedly be, a lot of happy people, certainly in Israel, but also in the Palestinian territories as well.
I mean, Donald Trump has called this peace at last, but it's far from it.
Right. It's interesting because he's been framing this for the last 2 weeks as some broad peace agreement, right? Like
Centuries of war coming to an end, yes. Thousands of years.
3,000 years. Someone needs to ask him what he thinks was happening 3,000 years ago, but that's maybe another story for another day. But he's framing this up as kind of like an Oslo-style broad agreement. Now, Oslo didn't end up producing anything, but at least it had the outlines of what would have been a broad peace. But that's not what this is. This is just calling for an end to the war. That's all that is tangible. This is much closer to...
It is a ceasefire.
It's a ceasefire. It's much closer to the ceasefires from 2009 and 2012 and 2014 and so on. But we don't have the outlines for a broad peace. We don't have any discussion of the occupation of the West Bank. There's no discussion in the 20-point plan of the blockade on Gaza or any of the structural roots of this conflict. So I'll be interested to see what is discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh. He's talking about a broad peace. So let's wait and see.
Well, I mean, even if we get to stage 3, we end up, in a ceasefire deal, we end up with a buffer around Gaza, in Gaza itself. So it's still occupied.
Right. Well, that's one of the tricky things about this 20-point plan. I wrote an article almost 2 weeks ago now talking about some of the problems with the plan. There are serious problems. I mean, one is this Israeli withdrawal, which is not really a withdrawal. They would still be in about 20% of Gaza, effectively occupying Gaza. And there are a number of other problems with the plan. This issue of Palestinian agency, there's really no mention of Palestinian agency or self-determination in the 20-point plan. So we have to, there has to be a discussion about governance. It's not tenable, certainly from the Palestinian perspective, that you would have this kind of colonialist structure come in and govern Gaza. And then you have the issue of weapons. What happens to the weapons? From the Palestinian perspective, you have Israel admitting that they actively arm gangs in Gaza. No one's calling on for the disarmament of those gangs. You have Israel saying that it's going to continue to occupy Gaza, and at the same time asking the Palestinians to give up all of their weapons, even defensive weapons.
When Israel normalized relations with Egypt, Jordan, and you could also argue with the Abraham Accords, they didn't demand that the other side disarm either.
That's true. That's true. And one of the things I would be remiss if I didn't mention this whole issue of education and de-radicalization. So fair enough, education and de-radicalization, but why not for both sides? Why is there no discussion in the 20-point plan about the de-radicalization of Israeli society? There was a poll recently, 47% of Jewish Israelis said that they would like to see all inhabitants of Gaza, including women and children, killed. You have more than 60% saying that they're not troubled at all by reports of famine in Gaza. More than 60% of Israeli Jews believe in the existence of a modern-day Amalek. This is the group that the Bible commands the Israelites to completely annihilate, including their suckling babies. I could go on. The polling data from Israel are deeply disturbing. So if there's going to be a kind of de-radicalization program, you would think that you would maybe even start with Israeli society and the Israeli side that has just perpetrated a genocide.
But, you do have people like the Ben Gvirs of this world and Mr. Smotrich who give license to what you're talking about right now. And Israeli politics has continually got gradually more and more drifting to the right.
That's true, but I do think it's sometimes misguided to put everything on Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the so-called far right, because a lot of what they say tends to be very mainstream in Israel. I just cited for you some polling results. That's certainly not just the right wing. Right after Donald Trump released his Riviera plan back last winter, they did a poll. The Jewish People Policy Institute did a poll, and 82% of Israeli Jews said they liked Donald Trump's plan, which called for the mass expulsion of the Palestinians. So again, it's not just a problem of the so-called far right in Israel.
Mohammed, and I will be hearing from you later on. Mohammed Hamasri, a political analyst and professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. We can now get to Khan Yunis again in the Nasser hospital where Hind Khudari is. Hind, what have you got for us?
Well, more families are coming and more families are coming after they saw the list of the 1,700 Palestinian prisoners that are going to be freed today. Now, let me highlight the fact that not everyone was able to see the list because most of the Palestinians do not have internet or phones, but we have Yasser Abu Azzoum, and he himself has been arrested and freed by the Israeli forces. His son, 23-year-old Muhammad, is going to be freed today after he was arrested in December 2023. So we're talking about more than a year of separation. Let me first ask you, كيف حاسس اليوم؟
Can you describe your feeling? My feeling is indescribable, and I hope our joy will be complete by the release of all the Palestinian prisoners behind the Israeli bars. I thank God for the release of my son. You yourself were detained by the Israeli occupation forces, and you have been through the same agony. How can you describe, especially that your son is going through the same pain? I was arrested with my son in the same sheltering school in 2023. For 2 years almost, I haven't seen him. My joy today is much higher than the joy I had on the day I was released. I will be reunited with my son, and I again pray for the release of all the Palestinians. Excuse me, I'm not able to speak properly because I'm overwhelmed with joy. Thank you for talking to us. Last question. What is the first thing you will do once you're joined with your son? I don't know. I will start hugging him, kissing him. I haven't seen him for 2 years, and he has a young brother who he hasn't seen. He was born while my son was in the prison. We will be joined, reunited, and will spend days in joy. Thank God.
So this is one of the stories of the Palestinian prisoners. So Muhammad was arrested in a school along with his father. He was separated from his family and also from his father. His wife gave birth to his child. He didn't see his child. He is going to be released today. Now we see Palestinians clapping. There is a lot of emotions today. There is a lot of anticipation today, and a lot of Palestinian families are still coming on the way, waiting for their beloved ones.
Hind, thank you. Hind Khudari there at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Now let's get to Amman because, of course, Nourode is following developments in Israel from the Jordanian capital. She's there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting in Israel and indeed from the occupied West Bank. Noor, we have seven Israeli captives who've been released. What more can you tell us about them?
Well, those 7 captives are in the custody of the Israeli army. They are in a good condition. They are walking. They will be united with their families. Some of the Israeli captives have actually contacted their families by phone. This is quite unprecedented, and pictures of those phone calls are circulating in Israeli media. Really scenes that were almost unfathomable just a few weeks ago. This is the first step of the exchange that we are expecting to conclude today. 7 have been released, 13 living Israeli captives remain, Rashad, as well as the bodies of 28 Israeli captives killed during the past 2 years. We're not sure how many of those bodies Hamas was able to retrieve. Let's just remember, Israel has devastated the Gaza Strip. It continues to be present. The forces are in 53% of the Gaza Strip. So already before this day arrived, the Israeli authorities, the mediators were well aware that there is a possibility that not all the bodies would be retrieved and delivered once the 72 hours stipulated in the Trump plan conclude. But nonetheless, this is a big day for the families of Israeli captives and also for the families of Palestinian prisoners. Some of them have been devastated by late-hour news that their sons would not be released to the occupied West Bank. At least 12 of them will be exiled from those who were supposed to be released to the occupied West Bank. And already, Israeli authorities have banned 20 families from leaving the West Bank to join their sons who will be exiled out of Palestine. So there's a mixed bag of emotions here and a long day still awaiting the Palestinian prisoners who will be released from Israeli prisons. The 1,700 Palestinians disappeared from Gaza who will also be released to Khan Yunis, where our colleague Hind is. So still a lot of developments anticipated. The second release of Israeli captives, Rashad, is expected within the hour, at the top of the hour, 10 a.m. local time. At least that's what we're understanding from sources on the ground.
Yep, and also from Israeli television as well. Thank you, Noor Odeh, there in Amman. Well, Palestinian families, just to remind ourselves here, they are awaiting the release of their loved ones who were detained by Israel. Under the deal, nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for the 48 Israeli captives. Among them, 1,718 Palestinians from Gaza. The United Nations considers them forcibly disappeared. There are 250 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, who have been serving life and long sentences, mostly for attacks or alleged involvement in violence against Israelis. Now, 154 of them are going to be exiled. 96 are expected to be sent back to the occupied West Bank, and that does include East Jerusalem. Now, ahead of this exchange, prisoners have been transported to Ofer prison near Ramallah and Ketziot prison in the Negev desert. And indeed, they are on their way, apparently, from those prisons as well to various parts of the whole of Palestine. Right, Nida Ibrahim is with me. Nida, what are you making of today's news?
Yeah, today is a good day for many Palestinian families. Some of them are going to be receiving their sons home, but others are going to be waiting to see where their sons are going to be deported to. Are they going to be going to Gaza? Are they going to be going outside of the Palestinian territory? That is still unknown, but these deportations were asked for by the Israeli security, by the Israeli government. It's something that Israel has done before for Palestinian prisoners to kind of try to prevent the Palestinians from reuniting with their loved ones at home. We've reported on this before, Rashad, when we've seen families hoping and waiting to reunite with their loved ones who've been released as part of previous exchange deals. But then they could not travel outside of the occupied West Bank to meet family members, and their deportees, these prisoners, cannot cross back into the occupied West Bank to meet their families. These are moments of anticipation. Unfortunately, some of those who have waited long years could not make it to see this day, including the mother of one prisoner from Aida refugee camp, Mazyuna Nasser. Her son, his name is Nasser, Mazyuna Abu Srour. She waited for her son for 32 years to be released, but unfortunately she passed away in August. So all of these moments are going to be difficult and emotional for those who have waited and waited for all of these exchange deals and have not been able to see their loved ones.
Bittersweet, I think, is the word you're looking for in some ways. And I think you've got a list of the prisoners that are being released in front of you. On top of that, what about the sort of the political prisoners? The most notable names are missing.
Indeed, and that was something that Hamas has been trying to get across the mediators to try and lobby for. They wanted the big names, the symbolic figures who are serving life sentences, who are considered to be unifying figures, and kind of to try and bring to the Palestinian community some sort of relief that, yes, there are still 10,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, but at least we were able to free some of the key and well-known figures. Of course, that did not work because Israel has insisted time and again that they're not going to be releasing those Palestinian prisoners. And it seems like Hamas was not negotiating from a position of power at this point, so it could not have delayed the process, could not have stopped the releases from happening. Yes, the list is with me, and there are many names, including the family of Aroum, who we've been reporting on since late last night, trying to prepare and gather and see if their two sons are going to be released. And yes, indeed, they will, but they're going to be deported.
Out of the prominent political prisoners, which is perhaps the most prominent figure to be released?
Well, there are the list. Let me read you the oldest one of them. He's been detained in 1986. 39 years in Israeli jails. Samir Abu Ni'meh, who's expected to be released. As I said, there are also Nasser Abu Srour, whose mother has unfortunately passed away. Nasser is a known Fatah figure. He's from the Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem. So we are talking about the prominence of those people stems from the fact that they spent years and years behind bars, nearly, as you see, 39 and 38, and the numbers go on. But we are talking about people who would not have any other chance to be released if it was not for this swap deal, which is a very important point, Rashad. Why? Because one of the reasons why Hamas said it has done the October 7th and has grabbed as many Israeli captives is to say that we want to exchange them for Palestinian prisoners, because otherwise they're going to be staying in jail and potentially dying.
Because there's a lack of due process now.
There's a lack of due process since the beginning, but because Israel is trying these Palestinians in military courts, saying that they are committing attacks that are resisting Israel's occupation. And again, one man's a terrorist is another's freedom fighter. So for Palestinians, they see their acts of resisting the occupation not only as a duty, but also as a right under the international law. But of course, Israel sees it differently, and that's why it imprisons them. But yes, the majority of those and most of those who are in Israeli jails right now are held under administrative detention, which is arrest without a charge.
Well, absolutely. So we get the release of these prisoners, and of course the captives go back into Israel. But that's today. What's tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 10,000 Palestinian prisoners remain in jail, and more could be joining them, including those who are released in captive
Because some of these people on the list are have been in jail multiple times.
And some of the people we've reported on, Rashad, in previous deals have been rearrested later. So there's nothing really that could guarantee that. But I think the major question for Palestinians now is whether the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will respect the plan put forward by President Trump to end the war and keep pushing with it, as opposed to breaking the ceasefire, as Netanyahu did in March when parties were discussing phase 2 of negotiations. So there's really little trust in Netanyahu's intentions when it comes to ending the war, but there is this deep hope and aspiration that indeed will happen.
Well, to do anything, you've got to rebuild the place, which has been utterly destroyed.
It's utterly destroyed, devastated, and Israel is yet to allow the big machines in, the aid inside, and that we're talking about huge destruction that will need undoubtedly a lot of money to be able to be rebuilt. But more importantly, I think, Rashad, is the traumas that were caused by a 2-year genocide being live streamed. That's something that the people in Gaza need so a lot right now. You know, if you're watching the news in Gaza, you probably would have been affected. So imagine being inside, living through this pain, these continued and relentless bombardment, the arrests, the killing, the lack of medical attention, the lack of aid, the lack of food in a man-made starvation. All of that comes really handy and in need right now that there needs to be more assistance and aid in looking for Palestinians inside Gaza.
Well, as soon as this prisoner exchange occurs, there's meant to be 600 aid trucks crossing the border. And that's what you need every day.
That's what Gaza used to get before the war. So let's not forget that the 600 trucks were entering Gaza before the war started. So imagine the dire need right now. Imagine how many hospitals have been destroyed, how many homes have been flattened, how many people have lost their jobs, so they have no way of earning money to be able to provide for their families. The prices have surged due to the high demand, due to the lack of supply. So we are talking about a great need inside Gaza that will go beyond the 600. Of course, the 600 trucks are going to be of much needed relief. The numbers are yet to reach that level right now. But again, this is something that people are hoping and anticipating for. But again, for them, today is a good day because we are talking about 1,700 Palestinian prisoners from Gaza who are going to be released, who are going to be reunited with their families. And remember, Israel, in its admission, says that those 1,700 people have nothing to do with the October 7th attack. So basically, they're saying they did nothing for us to arrest them. But still, not only were they arrested, but they were unaccounted for as Israel refused to give human rights organizations information about them, their detention. So it was really hard to get information about what their status is inside Israeli jail. We've heard a lot of stories about doctors who were tortured, including Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was a very well-known figure inside the Gaza Strip, doctor who really cared for his patients. But then he, presumably, according to the Israelis, died in Israeli jail. But according to all the testimonies coming from inside these prisons, what was happening to these doctors, what happened to those who were who were announced dead in Israeli jails, is because they were killed because of the systematic abuses, malnutrition, and lack of medical attention inside jails.